Hello. In this video we will be looking at Ger and Karuna Tillika, Lesson 1, Grammar, sections 5 to 10, beginning at the top of page 9. So, section 5, Sandhi. Sandhi actually means literally putting together. I will share screen with the iPad. Here we are. Sandhi. Sandhi is cognate with the Greek word synthe, which has come into English. The verbal noun form is synthesis, which we say in English is a synthesis. So a synthesis means putting together, literally. A thesis. Putting is the literal meaning of the word, which you put down. Synthesis, putting together. In Sanskrit, and Pali, sandhi, putting together. So sandhi, I'll read the text here. When two words or parts of words come together, one or both may change in shape at the juncture. The technical term for this is sandhi. Within a word it is internal sandhi, and between words it is external sandhi. In Pali, external sandhi is not thoroughgoing, unlike Sanskrit, but generally affects only closely related forms, often specific, frequently used combinations. 3 sandhi effects are relevant to this lesson. Now, what is meant by the expression here, sandhi is not thoroughgoing? That is by contrast to Sanskrit, where there are tightly applied and very rarely violated rules of sandhi. In the Macdonell grammar, we have pages 10 to the first half of page 32, quite a substantial section on sandhi. The rules are fairly complex in Sanskrit. So complex, in fact, that in modern times, where, for example, a text is an edition of text is given for public consumption, you will often find that the Sanskrit with all the correct sandhi, all this variation of words at the juncture of words, is given in the normal and correct way, and the same text is repeated below, separating out the words, giving each word in its separate form without sandhi, without these changes that sandhi causes. I would counsel you against attempting to master all the rules of sandhi at one go. Assimilate them bit by bit as you go along. In fact, when I was studying Sanskrit to start with, back in 65, this sandhi I found, I regret to say, the most boring and difficult to master of all the aspects of Sanskrit. But then I just assimilated as it went along. There are some very, very common rules that are occurring the entire time, and you soon get those. There are others that are unusual combinations you see occasionally. So don't worry about it, just assimilate it as you go along. The most important thing is not to have an active memory of, I'm talking more specifically about Sanskrit now, not to have an active memory for how it all works, but to be able to recognize when it's happened. That is far more important. Now, in Pali, you do get sandhi, words altering their form. So the end of one word collides with the beginning of the next word, and some alteration in form takes place. In Pali, those rules are less rigidly applied than in Sanskrit. The rules that you've got to learn are far fewer in Pali than in Sanskrit. And again, I do emphasize, pick them up as you go along. The most important thing to remember overall in Sandhi is that these changes are dictated by phonetic ease of pronunciation. They are not random. If you just go into soft focus and imagine the language being spoken as a fluent thing, these phonetic changes will appear natural. In English, for example, we have quite a bit of Sandhi, with the difference that whereas in Sanskrit and Pali the alterations caused by Sandhi are reflected in writing, in English they're generally not reflected in writing. So let's go now to 5.1 on page 9. When two vowels come together, the first may be lost. In this text, the loss will be marked with an apostrophe. So we have cha plus eva. In Sanskrit, in Pali, you can have cha plus eva, cha eva, or optionally it will become cheva. Just the a of cha will be lost and it will combine with the eva. Cheva. In texts written in the Roman script, the loss of that vowel will typically be marked by an apostrophe, exactly the same way as we do in English. And the other example given is na-ati becomes natti. And you can see why for phonetic ease, na-ati, natti, cha-eva, cheva. 5.2. When two similar vowels come together, the result may be a long vowel rather than the loss of the first. Similarly, when the quotation marker iti is added, a preceding vowel lengthens and the e in parentheses is lost. I'll explain that. We've seen that when we were introduced to this word iti, it was given like this with the I in brackets and the T. So the rule is, it applies in Pali but not in Sanskrit, that wherever you get a word ending in a short vowel followed by T or iti, that short vowel automatically and always lengthens before the T. We see does not come back again. I'm looking here at the last words of the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So my pen's going a bit wrong here. Na punar eti. Na punar, sorry, my pen occasionally plays up. Come on, pen. Na punar does not go again or does not come again. These are the closing words of the Karaniya Metta Sutta. But you will remember that when we chant that or recite it, it's na punare ti ti. Now that ti is a marker, as we've discussed, for end of quote or end of a passage, especially a sutta or a chant that we have been reciting. So na punare ti ti. What happens then is we get this short vowel, eti, on its own, eti, followed by a separate word ti, and it lengthens, na punare ti ti. Typically, and it does it in this grammar that we're looking at, the lengthened vowel will be marked with a circumflex accent. That circumflex accent is a device used to help students. It is not reflected in any of the other scripts in which Pali is written, in particular the Devanagari script sometimes, or the Sinhala, or the Thai, or the Burmese, or the Khmer, as the Cambodian scripts. It's not reflected there. So this circumflex is put there as an aid to students. As for example, we're just about to see Naham below. I'll explain the use of the circumflex again there. Going back to the first sentence under 5.2, when two similar vowels come together, the result may be a long vowel rather than the loss of the first. We've seen nati under 5.1 becoming nati, whereas na'aham becomes naham with a long ah. I'll explain that in a moment. So the text goes on to say, as we've just said, that a final short vowel becomes long before ti, napunare ti ti. Such vowel lengthenings resulting from sandhi will be marked in this text by a circumflex rather than a macron. That's the circumflex accent rather than a macron accent. Macron is the sign used just to lengthen a vowel. That's ah, that's ah, that's e. This is E, so I haven't written that very well. E, E, U, and U. There's the macron, just meaning large or great in Greek, which we have in English as macro. It just means it enlarges or increases the vowel, or in linguistic terms, lengthens it. This represents no pronunciation difference. They are read the same, but it makes them easier to identify. As I just said, where you get na'aham becoming naham, it's written as an ordinary long ah. In most of the Romanized texts you'll see, and routinely just as an ordinary long ah in the native, which you might call the native scripts, be it in Devanagari, Sinhala, Thai, Burmese. And it's used just as an aid to students in Roman script, just to remind the students that this lengthening of the vowel results from a merger of two other vowels. So it says here, when the student progresses to texts as usually printed, this aid will not be available, but hopefully he, she will be by then accustomed to the types of sandhi found. So na'aham becomes naham. So let's look at that. Na'aham. And I'm going to put also, as we've just seen, na'ati is not is. Oops. Ati. Now, na'aham typically will be lengthened to naham. So these two short as will coalesce into one long naham naham. But we've just seen a few moments ago that na'ati resolves into nati with a short ah. And you might well ask why. Why does na'aham become naham, but na'ati doesn't become nati but nati? The reason is that in Pali, usually, not always, occasionally you find, but usually you find that wherever you get a vowel followed by a consonant cluster or a doubled consonant, Pali prefers to shorten the vowel before a doubled consonant or a consonant cluster. So Pali tends to avoid things like nati, and that's why it's shortened to nati. It's different in Sanskrit, where you have the equivalent of na'ati in Sanskrit is na'asti, is not is how it's put. So nasti. Now in Sanskrit, the short a and the long a will regularly merge into a long a. So it will be nasty is not. And in Romanized texts that assist the student in this way, instead of writing it as just a long, it will be written as a circumflex, just as an aid to the student, to remind the student that this is the coalescing of two vowels. And And the other example given at the bottom of 5.2 is samvattati plus iti samvattatiti. Again, it's a slightly different rule. That's a more general rule that in Pali a short vowel followed by t always lengthens. So samvattati, samvattatiti, napunareti, napunaretiti. There are the roots of trees. Go sit, or just sit, says the Buddha. Itarukka mulani sidata. Sit, ending in a short a. But if you were then, the Buddha said, sit. You say, sit iti, said the Buddha. Not sidata, but sidatati. So that long, the final a is lengthened to an a because of the following t. It doesn't make any grammatical difference. This is purely a phonetic phenomenon of Pali. Now the third rule of Sandhi given here under 5.3, when a nasal precedes another consonant, a nasal is just anything that's pronounced with the mouth closed where the air is coming through the nose only, but with lips closed. And the nasals are So there, no air is coming out of the mouth, the air is coming out of the nose only. So, mouth completely closed, vocal cords vibrating, but the air coming out of the nose only. Try saying you'll hear the slight puff of breath coming out of the nose. That's why it's called nasals. So when a nasal precedes another consonant, it may assimilate to it and become the nasal produced in that position. So let's look at the example given here. And the truth, satyancha. So on its own, it's a neuter noun. In Pali, it is, in Sanskrit, pen's playing it. In Sanskrit, it is satyam, satyam, pure M sound. In Pali, satyang. It's normally pronounced nowadays with an l sound, satyang. Back in the time of the Buddha, I pretty strongly suspect that it was pronounced in the same way that it would be pronounced by modern Indians, and the same way that Sanskrit was pronounced then, just as a final M, satyam, satyam. But you will find among, I'm not quite sure what they do in Burma, but certainly among the Thais and the Sri Lankans, that final subdotted M is pronounced as a L sound, satyang, both Thais and Sri Lankans. And although for years and years I steadfastly pronounced it at the end of a sentence or word group as satyam, I've come round to accepting that I pretty much have to say satyang to follow the Sinhala and the Thai ways of pronouncing it. So back to where we were. It now is going to be followed by a word beginning with a palatal, a ch sound. It's called a palatal because the tongue is not against the teeth and it's not curled back, retroflex. It's on the hard palate just behind this ch, ch. So let's switch satyang. You can write satyangcha in two different ways. You can write satyang plus cha, but it's also equally correct. You'll find both, they're both correct, they're both completely allowable. You can also find it written in this way. Take that nasal and change it to a palatal nya, satyancha, and when it's written like that, typically the words will be joined into one. So, satyang plus cha will, although it can correctly be written like that, it would be pronounced as satyancha because the final ng sound would automatically be pronounced in the same position, that palatal position, as the following consonant, satyancha. Just try it. It's more natural. Satyancha. It's more natural to say satyancha. So you put your tongue for the nasal in exactly the same position that the following sound is going to be. So, as I say, both of these forms are correct in Pali. Let's try it with the following T. I've just given you the rule that the T will have the effect of lengthening a preceding short vowel when it's preceded by a consonant or by the subdotted M. No change is necessary, so it'll just get, so it can be written in one of these two ways. They both be pronounced the same. You can write them separate, as in the first example I've given, Sachanti, which in running speech you would pronounce as Sachanti. And so you can write it in either of those ways. Here notice that the subdotted M has become an ordinary N, that's the dental N, as opposed to the tilde N. And that's because it's pronounced at the same, as linguists call it, point of articulation, as where the tongue is as the sound comes out. So this T is dental. That means the tip of the tongue is against the ridge of the back of the upper teeth. In the dental position, that's why it's called dental, the tongue against the teeth. So Sachanti, Sachancha, Sachanti. And you'll find this rule being applied throughout the language. In fact, the very word sandhi that we've just been looking at is in fact san plus di, which can be correctly written, and most commonly is correctly written as sandhi. What's happened is this, the anuswara, which is the word for the subdotted M, sorry, which we'll deal more with, quite a bit more with as time goes on, just by pronunciation and also by spelling, tends to be written as sandhi. Now we turn to section 6, negatives. Na, that's the most common negative. It's directly cognate with the Latin non and with the English no and not. They're etymologically the same word. So na may negate sentences. If the following word begins with a vowel, the a of the na is commonly dropped, though it may lengthen if that vowel is a, as we've just seen. Na-aham can become na-hum. So nati it is not, but na-hum not I. And I've just explained that. It's because the Pali is fine with na-aham lengthening to a before a single vowel, na-hum, but if it's before a single consonant. But if it's a doubled consonant or a consonant cluster, as I said, Pali will tend to avoid a long vowel, so na-ati will be nati in Pali, although na-asti becomes na-sti in Sanskrit. Sanskrit has no problem with long vowels before doubled consonants and consonant clusters. It goes on to say, so note that even though na negates an entire sentence, it does not necessarily occur near the verb. Unlike the English not, well, that's correct. So naham samanupasami, I do not perceive. In English we'd say I not, or I do not perceive. And following that same order, it would be aham na samanupasami, which would be correct in Pali. But Pali will very often place the na at the beginning of a sentence, even though it separates it from the verb. That's normal. So na, aham na samanupasami and aham na samanupasami mean the same thing. Bear in mind that when you say naham samanupasami, it doesn't mean not I. I mean, it's not I who perceive it, but somebody else. It doesn't mean that at all. It means exactly the same as aham na samanupasami. It's an emphatic way of saying I do not perceive. Now down to 6.2. A negates words like the English un or in before a vowel. It occurs in a negates words before a vowel. It occurs as un. Now we do exactly the same in English via Greek. So this a, the negating a, the Greek word tomos means cutting. So atomos, which we have in English as atom, means the uncuttable. orexia means appetite in Greek, and being without an appetite is anorexia. So the a becomes an before a vowel, exactly as in Greek and as reflected in English. In fact, our English word un directly reflects that. So our un is a reflection of the a or an that we find in Pali and Sanskrit and in Greek. So asukho is more normally a neuter noun. Actually, it's one of those nouns that can be both. It's more commonly sukham and dukham. So sukham, happiness, asukham, unhappiness. And atto, that's the nominative form. The stem form is atta. Atto. Atta means an objective, an aim, a goal. Karaniyam atta kusalena, to be done by the goal-skilled, one who is skilled in achieving the goal. Becomes anatto. And it's mostly seen as an adjective, anatta or anattam, meaning goalless, therefore pointless, useless. You'll find this very frequently, this meaning, this use of the a and an to mean not or un. All you need to do is remember that it reflects our English word un, and that'll make it easy. Top of page 10 now. In this book, negatives in a or an are henceforth not listed separately in the lesson glossaries unless their meaning is not directly derivable from their parts. That's what dictionaries normally do. If you see a word and with an a or an in front of it, it just negates it. Not quite as simple as that, but mostly as simple as that. And therefore they tend not to be listed separately in dictionaries. But sometimes you find that the negated word has a meaning beyond a pure negation of the word, in which case the dictionary will list it if there's an extended meaning. Thus a student, says, encountering a sukho in a reading and not finding in the glossary should look under sukho. So it's the same as telling a student of English, if you see the word unhappy, you don't find unhappy in the dictionary. It's not the un off, look up happy, it negates happy. Section 7, agreement of adjectives. All of those who've studied Latin or French or Spanish or Italian or any of the languages where you have genders for nouns will be familiar with having to change the form of the adjective to fit the gender of the noun. My wife is dead. You wouldn't say in French, mon is la femme, feminine. You wouldn't say mon femme est mort. You would say ma femme est morte. You'd have to change both forms into the feminine. So adjectives agree in gender, case, and number. Well, gender and number, those of you who studied Latin, well, Latin was case as well, those of you who studied French, Spanish, and Italian and the like will be familiar with the adjectives changing to reflect not only the gender, but the number, that is singular or plural, of the noun that it qualifies. Speakers of, for example, Hindi, Urdu, and any of the languages of northern India, and I think the same applies to the Dravidian as well, but certainly the languages of northern India, you'll find that the adjectives, not all but most of them that have a changeable end, will change according to masculine and feminine and singular and plural. Remember that they change for case as well in Pali and Sanskrit, but no worries there, because the declension of adjectives is essentially the same as the declension of nouns. There's no separate declension or form of declension to be learnt, unlike, for example, in Russian, where the declension of the adjectives is a completely separate series of forms from the declension of nouns. In Sanskrit and Pali, the endings are the same. So adjectives agree in gender, case and number with the nouns that they modify. So kusalo dhammo, a good doctrine, well, also it means a good state of mind, a good phenomenon. So kusalo dhammo, that's the masculine singular. Akusala dhamma, unskillful states. Dhamma is the plural. So the adjective akusala, here we see another example of kusala akasul, they are just negating it. So akusala dhamma. And if it were in the accusative singular, it would be akusalan dhammang. In the instrumental, akusalena dhammena. So the adjective will have to agree with the noun in gender, case and number. In the plural, for example, instrumental plural, dhammehi, akusalehi dhammehi, the noun there, the adjective rather, agreeing with the noun. It gives another example, chittan adantam. Note here there is a misprint in your printed text. It is a subdued mind or a tamed mind. No, it's unsubdued. It was just a misprint there. You've forgotten the chittan dantang would be a tame, a chittang, the mind, that is dantang, subdued or tamed. In fact, dam, which the past participle was danta, is cognate with our English word tame. So danta means tamed. So chittang adantang, the mind untamed. Also, there's another misprint further along in the same line where it's a neuter, nominative, or accusative. So accusative has put an S in there by mistake, so change that in your texts. I proceed with what's printed here. Note that although adjectives often precede the nouns that they modify, the opposite order is possible, as in the last example above. In that case, the adjective is often derived from a verb, and there may be a special sense like that in English. The mind which is subdued, or the mind when subdued. We could say the unsubdued mind is a danger, or the mind unsubdued is a danger, meaning the mind when it is unsubdued is a danger. It's a matter of style. It doesn't really, maybe a slight difference of emphasis. It's largely a matter of style. Anyway, the usual order in English is adjective followed by noun. Again, that is the usual order in Pali and Sanskrit, but it's not rigid. The agreeing endings for adjectives, it goes on to say, will be given later. Okay. For the present, we simply note the agreement. As I've said, it's mostly the same. Section 8, accusative of destination. I dealt with this earlier when in the section on the accusatives, where it's the object of a verb, and I mentioned the accusative of, often called the accusative of motion as well, motion towards. So, and it gives our example, Buddhang saranang gacchami. Here, if you're going home, gehang gacchami, I'm going home, gehang gacchami, gehang in the accusative. Nagarang gacchami, literally city I am going, just put city, nagara, nagaro, in the accusative nagarang gacchami, I'm going to the city. Here it's motion in a figurative sense. You are going, you're not physically moving towards the Buddha, you're going to the Buddha for refuge. So Buddhang saranang gacchami. It's a double accusative here. I'm going refuge, meaning going for refuge. I'm going to the Buddha for refuge. Both go in the accusative. So Buddhang saranang gacchami. And when we come to deal with the text, I'll tell you there's a lot more to saranang than simply refuge. But that's for the text and the discussion of the meanings of words rather than the grammar. Section 9, conjoining in series. That's A and B. We can say A, B, C, D, and E, or A and B and D and C and D, and so on. We can say both in English. If you repeat the ands, it's slightly more emphatic. In Pali, in Sanskrit, you can do the same, but just have one cha, not before the last item, but after the last item, or you can have cha in between all of the items. This last form is probably a little bit more common. So items in a sentence or even whole sentences may be conjoined simply by giving them in sequence without a cha. So you can put the cha once or put the cha multiple times after each item, or you can omit the cha. Kusalam dhammanam titiya samosaya bhayobhavaya vepullaya. For the persistence, non-confusion, increase, fulfillment, we'd have to say in English, and fulfillment of good elements, good mental states, good phenomena. Again, it's stylistic. You can optionally leave it out. Mostly you don't, but in a kind of a rolling doctrine like that, you just, each word kind of emphasizes the other, and more or less synonyms, you will often find the cha omitted. And in the next example, Chandanjaneti Vayamati Viryang Arabhati. So generates resolution, strives, makes an effort. We can do the same in English. Strives and makes an effort. Strives, makes an effort. So here it's not markedly different from English. It's optional and a matter of style. Notice on a matter of phonetics, you've got, say, Chandang, pronounced separately, Chandang Janeti, from, in fact, cognate with our English word, generates from the Latin genus, we say in English a genus, and the Greek genesis, we say genesis, is that same root. Geneti, generates, creates, gives birth to. So generates resolution, like a desire, chandam. So written separately, chandam janeti, but pronounced in running speech, that final subdot, the final ng sound, you'll hear it most often pronounced as an n, in exactly the same position that the following j comes out. So chandanjaneti. That would generally not be reflected in the writing, but it would be reflected in speech. So if you said chandanjaneti, it's not actually wrong, but it's better to say chandanjaneti, even though you'd always write it as a subdotted M. In case you're puzzled, well, I said earlier you can change that subdotted M. In fact, I gave the example here. Sachangcha can be written as sachancha, and sachangti can be written as sachanti. That's here. The answer is that occurs normally with short words, short and very common words that are tacked onto the end. So sachancha, sachancha. With entirely separate words that have their own, they can stand freely, chandanjaneti, you would tend to write them separately. I don't think you'd ever find chandanjaneti written as one word with the n tilde. Finally, section 10, compounds. Compounds are quite a subject in Sanskrit and Pali. We have compounds in English as well, which can reach a similar level of complexity. So in Pali as in English, compounds may be formed by joining two nouns. So itti, a woman, saddo, sound. Itti saddo, literally a woman sound, the sound of a woman. Puriso, man, plus rupang, form. So purisa rupang, the form of a man. Now, note very importantly that where we have, say, purisa, meaning a man, specifically a male person, so purisa, stem form, nominative puriso. When you combine words in compounds, the first or all of the words preceding the final member are in the stem, almost always in the stem form. There are a few exceptions, don't bother about those now. Almost always in the stem form. So puriso, nominative singular is a man, stem form purisa, combined with rupang form, say purisa rupang, male form, the form of a man. Buddha, stem form, nominative buddho. Dhamma, we know, nominative form dhammo. So the Buddha, the doctrine of the Buddha, we can say in Pali, is that the Buddha doctrine, it's not buddho dhammo, it's buddha dhammo. Stem form Buddha, then buddha dhammo, treated as one word and declined as one word. And you will find that when you are declining a compound, the last member only will be declined. So Buddha dhammo, Buddha dhammang, Buddha dhammena, Buddha dhammassa, Buddha dhamme. Notice the Buddha, the first member of the compound, remains in the stem form throughout, and only the final member is declined. So I'll go on to read here. Note that the first member of a compound is regular in the stem form. For masculine and neuter nouns, this will usually be the same as the vocative singular. Yes, they're just ending in a short ah. And note, in this text, compounds will be given as such. I mean noted as compounds and given separately in the glossaries only if their meaning is not directly deducible from their parts and the context in which they occur. Thus, itisaddang and itirupang are given, since they also have the special senses. The word woman and beauty are the good form of a woman, but itigandho is not. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule whether you can determine what a compound means just by the form of it. Some dictionaries are more prolific with listing compounds than others. So I would say mostly you can determine the meaning of a compound just by looking at the separate members of it. Sometimes you can't, and ones where you can't, those the dictionaries will routinely give, and the glossaries in this book will routinely give. Thus, it says the student must learn to recognize compounds by looking at their parts. This is an important skill, since compounding is very frequent in Pali. In some kinds of texts, very long and complex compounds are found. Yes, they are. In the Pali suttas, they tend to be not too bad. In the more flowery classical Sanskrit literature, they can be quite long and complex. One of my favorite examples in English, we have the word railway. So it's a kind of way, but it's a railway. It's a way with rails. Okay, then we get now three-member compound, which is a railway station. Okay, that's a station for a railway as opposed to a police station or a fire station or a workstation. We have the word car park. We have lots of kinds of park. You have a car park, a place specifically to leave your car. Now we can put now these five members together. We can have the railway station car park. So now we have a five-member compound, but we don't have a problem with it in English, just as we've got used to it in English, so you'll get used to it in Pali and Sanskrit. And you can have a ticket machine. That's a machine that will dispense tickets. So now we can have a seven-member compound. You can have the railway station car park ticket machine. There we've got a seven-member compound. And you can resolve that compound by kind of working backwards. So the railway station car park ticket machine is a particular kind of machine. What kind of machine? Well, ticket machine, okay? So ticket machine where? Oh, in the park. What park in the car park? Oh, so it's the car park ticket machine. But car park specifically where? At the station. Which station? The railway station. So when you're analysing the compound, the railway station car park ticket machine, you actually work backwards. And you do exactly the same in Sanskrit and Pali. You'll get used to it as you go along, just as people have to get used to English compounds as they go along. English does it a fair degree. German does it rather more. It's natural to several of the Indo-European languages, and don't be put off by the problems of compounds. We have pretty much the same in English, and you get used to them just by feel as you go along. So that concludes this video, and this concludes the grammar part of lesson 1 of Ger and Karunatillike. So I'll say goodbye here.